In a distant place, sometime a very old one day. Today is dead and gone. Will tomorrow? The voice in my head that drives my heat.
Let me ask you something. You know how Bon Jovi sold out stadiums on 3 continents? How Guns N' Roses moved over 100 million records? How Def Leppard's Hysteria became one of the best-selling albums in rock history? Now ask yourself, what about the bands that were just as good, sometimes even better, but never got any of that? Today, we are going deep. We are talking about 10 legitimate, documented, historically verified. These aren't obscure for no reason. These are bands that fell through the cracks of one of the most commercially volatile decades in rock history. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how a band can have everything it takes to make it and still disappear without a trace. Let's get into it. Number 10, Blue Murder.
In a distant place, sometime a very old one day.
When John Sykes formed Blue Murder in 1988, the rock world had every reason to pay attention, and most of it did, at least briefly. To understand why the expectations around this band were so enormous, you have to understand who John Sykes was coming off of. This was a guitarist who had just co-written Whitesnake's self-titled 1987 album, one of the most commercially successful hard rock records of the entire decade. That album produced Here I Go Again, Is This Love, Still of the Night. It went 10 times platinum in the United States. 10 times. Sykes wrote most of it. Before Whitesnake, he spent time in Thin Lizzy during their final studio era, playing on Thunder and Lightning in 1983, the last studio album Phil Lynott ever recorded before his death. Sykes wasn't just connected to rock royalty, he had performed alongside it, grieved it, and come out the other side with something to prove. Blue Murder's 1989 self-titled debut was his answer. The album was produced by Bob Rock, and this is a name you need to lock in, because in just a couple of years, Bob Rock would go on to produce Metallica's Black Album, one of the best-selling metal albums of all time. He was already operating at an elite level, and it shows in every track on the Blue Murder record. By 1989, grunge was already moving beneath the surface of rock culture like tectonic plates shifting. Kurt Cobain had been in Aberdeen, grinding out what would become Nirvana for years. Soundgarden had released Ultra Mega OK in 1988. The Seattle scene was building critical mass. Record labels, particularly at the major level, weren't panicking yet, but the more perceptive A&R people were already quietly redirecting their attention and their budgets. For Blue Murder, that meant promotional support was anemic. US touring was limited. Internal instability within the band further complicated any momentum they tried to build. The infrastructure needed to break a hard rock act in America tour support. What happened instead is a story that became surprisingly common for quality rock acts in this specific window. Blue Murder found enormous commercial success in Japan, where the audience for melodic hard rock remained loyal, and the band's technical sophistication was genuinely appreciated. But back home, in the market that mattered most for mainstream breakthrough, nothing caught fire. Today, Blue Murder is correctly recognized as one of the last great melodic hard rock statements of the 1980s. It is a record made at the absolute tail end of an era by one of its most gifted architects. And almost nobody outside of dedicated collectors heard it when it mattered. Number 9, White Lion.
The voice in my head that drives my heat.
White Lion had everything the 1987 hard rock market was built to reward. Their album, Pride, released that year, delivered soaring vocals from frontman Mike Tramp, massive arena-sized choruses, and guitar work from Vito Bratta that separated this band from most of their contemporaries. Bratta wasn't just technically proficient, his playing had genuine emotional depth, melodic, expressive, unhurried in a genre that was constantly competing to be louder and faster and bigger. He played with restraint when restraint served the song, and with power when the song demanded power. Wait, and When the Children Cry pushed Pride to double platinum certification, White Lion became a legitimate fixture of late 80s rock radio. These weren't underground cult favorites, these were radio hits, MTV rotation staples, songs that moved units and filled venues. But the machinery that creates sustained rock stardom requires more than great songs and double platinum albums. It requires the band to function. Behind the scenes, the pressure was escalating in ways that the success couldn't mask. The label wanted the next Pride, commercially bulletproof, radio ready, replicable. The band wanted to grow and evolve musically. That tension isn't uncommon in rock history. What made it worse for White Lion was Brada himself, reportedly introverted, increasingly uncomfortable with the relentless grind of touring and the specific demands of fame in the late 80s rock world. The performance of rock stardom was not something he was built for, regardless of his talent. The follow-up albums attempted maturity but lost commercial momentum in the process. And then grunge arrived and made the entire question irrelevant. The speed with which MTV and radio pivoted away from the polished, melodic hard rock sound in the early 90s remains one of the most dramatic industrial shifts in rock history. By 1992, White Lion had quietly dissolved. Pride remains a defining document of its era, a record with real craft and real emotion in it. But the industry had moved on before the band ever had the chance to become what it could have been. Number 8. Fastway.
Today is dead and gone. Will tomorrow?
Fastway is the kind of band whose origin story sounds almost too dramatic to be real, except every detail of it is documented. Fast Eddie Clarke, legendary guitarist from Motorhead, one of the founding members of one of the most influential hard rock and proto-metal bands in British history, teamed up with Pete Way, the bassist from UFO. The stated goal was to inject raw, blues-infused rock back into the early 80s scene. Both men had decades of combined credibility. Both had played on records that shaped the genre. The band was built on a foundation of genuine rock pedigree. They brought in Jerry Shirley, the drummer from Humble Pie, another layer of serious rock lineage, and found their vocalist in a then unknown Irishman named Dave King, whose voice carried a plant-level grit and a natural charisma that you simply cannot manufacture. Pete Way couldn't get out of his contract. He was legally unable to record with the band. He left before a single note was captured, and he went on to join Ozzy Osbourne's band instead. The result was exactly what it needed to be. Fastway was raw, powerful, and loaded with attitude. Say What You Will and Easy Living hit with a garage band directness that had been largely abandoned by early 80s rock in favor of bigger production and arena polish. Critics responded well. A fan base began to form. Lineup changes disrupted their identity. Label shifts created uncertainty as they evolved their sound across subsequent albums waiting for the roar. And eventually, the Trick or Treat soundtrack in 1986, the specificity of what had made them compelling in the first place. They were chasing relevance in a market that had already moved past the niche they occupied. The Trick or Treat soundtrack is worth acknowledging on its own terms. It's a legitimate hard rock record with real energy, and Dave King's performances on it hold up. They faded quickly and quietly. A band with two legendary musicians in their founding lineup, a vocalist who later fronted Flogging Molly successfully, and an album produced by one of rock's great engineers, and most people have never heard their name. Number 7. Honeymoon Suite.
There was a time I wore a different face.
Honeymoon Suite's story is one of the more straightforward cases of geographic market limitations determining a band's legacy. Formed in 1,981 inches Niagara Falls, Ontario, they didn't arrive with rock pedigree or industry connections. They started the way countless bands start playing cover songs in local bars, building a live audience from scratch, grinding out shows 6 nights a week. The original material they were writing went at the end of sets, almost as an afterthought, slipped in after the covers to see how audiences would react. In 1983, they submitted a demo of New Girl Now. Honeymoon Suite was a precise, commercial, melodic rock record, polished but with genuine punch. The keyboards were sharp and purposeful rather than decorative. The guitar work had energy. The songwriting understood what made a hook land. New Girl Now reached number 23 inches Canada and crossed into the US top 60, a crossover that was genuinely uncommon for a Canadian rock act in 1984. The album went triple platinum in Canada and produced multiple charting singles including Burning in Love, Wave Babies, and Stay in the Light. The awards followed. So did the tours. They opened for Heart, ZZ Top, and Journey across North America, playing to audiences that had no previous investment in them and winning them over night after night. By any objective measure, this was a working, successful rock band with real commercial traction. Number 6. King's X.
That's holding back the weather.
King's X is the band that every serious musician in the 1990s and 2000s can tell you influenced them, and that almost nobody outside of those musicians has actually listened to. Formed in the mid-80s, King's X built a sound that had no precise equivalent anywhere else in rock. Heavy guitar riffs rooted in hard rock, vocal harmonies that carried the DNA of the Beatles, funk rhythms underneath all of it, and lyrics that engaged directly and unflinchingly with themes of faith, doubt, identity, and spiritual conflict. Not the decorative spirituality of arena rock ballads, the real, wrestling, uncomfortable kind. Their 1988 debut, Out of the Silent Planet, produced by Sam Taylor, announced the band as something genuinely new. Over My Head and Goldilocks demonstrated a band that could be heavy without being metal, melodic without being pop, and emotionally direct without being sentimental. The combination should not have worked as seamlessly as it did. The 3 members functioned as an almost perfect creative unit. Bassist and vocalist Doug Pinnick carried a voice of extraordinary range and soulfulness. His vocal performances anchored songs that dealt with pain and confusion and longing in ways that required a singer who actually understood those things. Guitarist Ty Tabor developed a thick, layered guitar tone that became quietly foundational to what followed in rock. Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Pantera, all of them absorbed what Tabor was doing with tone and heaviness and texture. Drummer Jerry Gaskill played with groove and feel rather than technical showmanship, giving the music a weight that Flash would have undermined. Number 5. Icon. Icon is a textbook case of how a single personnel decision at the worst possible moment can erase everything a band worked to build. Formed in Phoenix, Icon arrived in the mid-80s with a sound that was darker and sharper than much of what was competing for space. Their 1985 album, Night of the Crime, was produced by Eddie Kramer, the same engineer who worked with Fastway, the same man behind Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix. Kramer was operating at a level of craft that few in the industry could match, and the album reflects it. From the opening track, Naked Eyes, Night of the Crime feels cinematic. The guitar work is tight and purposeful. The vocals are polished without being sterile. The hooks are constructed for arenas, Out for Blood and Danger Calling. Position the band as a legitimate contender, a group ready to compete at the highest level of the genre. Icon attempted to regroup. They found a replacement vocalist and continued recording. But the damage inflicted by that period of instability was irreversible. By the time follow-up material arrived, the glam metal market was oversaturated, and the industry was already looking past it toward whatever was coming next. Night of the Crime survives today as a genuine cult classic, a record that collectors know and value, and that surfaces consistently in conversations about underappreciated 80s hard rock. It is proof, documented and specific, that talent and execution and professional production are not sufficient insurance against the chaos of industry circumstances. Number 4. Shooting Star. Shooting Star's story is about the collision between artistic sophistication and commercial infrastructure. Specifically, what happens when the former isn't matched by the latter. Their 1,980 self-titled debut blended arena rock with genuinely progressive elements, violin, piano, rich, layered vocal harmonies. The album was produced by Gus Dudgeon, the producer responsible for much of Elton John's classic catalog, a man who understood how to build a record that sounded emotionally massive without losing pop coherence. The album was also the first US release on Virgin Records. That distinction alone placed them at a historically significant moment in the American label landscape. Virgin was building its US presence, and Shooting Star was at the front of that effort. Tracks like Last Chance and Bring It On had the hooks, the emotional architecture, and the musicianship to compete directly with Foreigner, Kansas, and Journey the acts dominating the stadium rock space in the early 80s. The quality was not in question. A violin-driven progressive rock band did not translate easily to 3-minute music videos. That is not a criticism of the band. It is a structural reality of the media landscape they were operating in. Despite solid touring and a loyal fan base, they never broke nationally. Lineup changes and label uncertainty gradually reduced their profile until they were no longer a viable commercial concern. Their debut remains one of the genuinely great what-if albums in early 80s rock, sophisticated, emotionally honest, and unfairly lost to time. Number 3. Zebra. Zebra earned their break the hard way, and the industry gave it to them, and then quietly took it back. After years of relentless work on the Long Island club circuit, Zebra released their self-titled debut in 1983. The album was produced by Jack Douglas, the man behind classic Aerosmith, John Lennon's Double Fantasy, and a track record in rock production that commands genuine respect. Douglas understood how to make a 3-piece band sound enormous. The album performed beyond expectations. It went gold and stayed on the charts for over a year. A remarkable result for a debut from a band without any mainstream profile prior to its release. Tell Me What You Want and Who's Behind the Door showcased everything Zebra had been building toward in those years on the club circuit. Precise musicianship, dynamic arrangements that could shift in intensity and texture without losing coherence, and the voice of frontman Randy Jackson, which delivered the kind of soaring, emotionally charged performances that drew immediate and consistent comparisons to Robert Plant. That comparison was the defining contradiction of Zebra's career. Plant comparisons in 1983 were not entirely negative. Led Zeppelin had been broken up for 3 years, and the emotional residue of their absence, the technical skill was never in doubt, the ambition was never in doubt. The work ethic, those years on the Long Island circuit, those years of grinding before the record deal, was never in doubt. None of it was sufficient to overcome the way the industry decided to categorize them. Number 2. Aldo Nova. Aldo Nova is unique on this list for one specific reason. His commercial trajectory ended not because the industry failed him, but largely because he chose to step away from it on his own terms. Born in Montreal, Nova released his self-titled debut in 1982. The album was an extraordinary achievement for one primary reason he wrote it, performed nearly all of it, and produced the majority of it himself. The scope of his individual contribution to that record placed him in a category occupied by very few artists in rock history. The sound he created was ahead of its time in specific, identifiable ways. It was simultaneously aggressive and melodic, rooted in hard rock, but incorporating synthesizer textures in ways that felt forward-thinking rather than decorative. Fantasy, the album's breakthrough single, became one of the most immediately recognizable rock tracks of the decade. The album went platinum. Fooling Yourself and Ball and Chain further demonstrated Nova's ability to combine guitar-driven rock with the kind of technological integration that most hard rock acts at the time treated as either a threat or an afterthought, contributing to the business without submitting his identity to it. The debut remains a blueprint for the intersection of rock and technology, a document of what one exceptionally talented individual could build alone in a studio when the only limitation was their own vision. Number 1, Y and T. Y and T are the band that built the foundation that everyone else moved into after them and then got left standing outside without a key. Originally formed in the 1970s, Y and T reinvented themselves in 1981 with Earthshaker, an album that tightened their sound and pointed directly toward what glam metal would become over the following decade. Frontman Dave Meniketti is a guitarist and vocalist whose abilities place him objectively among the elite of his generation. A player who combined shredding technical skill with a vocal instrument capable of real emotional power, not just the performative intensity that the genre sometimes mistook for feeling. Songs like Rescue Me, Dirty Girl, and Squeeze demonstrated the specific balance that separated the great 80s hard rock acts from the merely competent ones. Raw power and enormous choruses operating simultaneously. This is the specific cruelty of Y and T's story. They didn't disappear because grunge swept them away, though grunge certainly didn't help. They disappeared because the industry they had helped to build, the template they had contributed to creating, rewarded other people and never came back to correct the omission. Y and T didn't vanish because they lacked talent. They vanished because the machinery of the music industry made decisions based on factors that had nothing to do with the quality of what was being made. And that is, ultimately, the through line connecting every band on this list. Blue Murder, built by a man who co-wrote one of the best-selling hard rock albums of the decade, undermined by timing and inadequate promotion. White Lion, double platinum, with real emotional depth in the guitar work, destroyed by internal instability and an industry that pivoted overnight. Fastway, assembled from Motorhead and UFO and Humble Pie, broken apart by contractual complications before they even got started. Honeymoon Suite, triple platinum in their home country, blocked by geographic market limitations that no amount of quality could overcome. King's X, directly influential on the generation of bands that defined 90s rock, too original for the radio formulas of their own era. Icon, a record produced by Eddie Kramer with Eddie Kramer's craft all over it, destroyed by a single personnel change at the worst possible moment. Aldo Nova, platinum debut, one-man production achievement, stepped away from the machine by choice. Y and T, touring machine, direct influence on the genre's biggest names, consistently undersupported by the labels at every critical window. These are not mysteries. These are documented failures of timing, industry structure, personnel decisions, promotional investment, and categorical bias.